Hi, my name is Debbie, and I am obsessed with all things to do with ultrasound. I'm an empty nester who has spent the last 28 years scanning in all different kinds of situations: clinics, hospitals, point of service, emergency departments, private offices, echo, vascular, general, high-risk OB, and want to dive down deep into all things to do with technology, techniques, and transformation. It's time we take ultrasound to the next level. Think of this like your little power boost on your commute to all things ultrasound, along your way to the thing that we call work. So pull up a seat, make sure you're comfy, and be ready to be challenged and encouraged as we learn it's all about the frequency. Today, we'll be talking with Cherish Hockey. She was born and raised in Michigan, where she attended Ferris State University. She first touched a transducer in 2003 at the age of 17 and haven't once questioned her career choice. Over a decade of MFM experience, with the majority of it spent as a preceptor and/or lead. Currently employed by a clinician-led company called Excel Telecare as an advanced practice sonographer specializing in maternal fetal medicine and OBGYN for over 3 years. Please help me welcome Cherish Hockey. Cherish, thank you for joining us today and sharing your perspective on today we'll be talking about precepting and what an important role that is. You've done this for a period of time, and I've been in ultrasound for a long time, and I've been to STMS where, we are just constantly talking about mentorships and precepting and how can we get better at this and what's required of it and what's a good preceptor and what's not. And so Cherish has got a lot of experience in this area, and so we're going to talk with her today in regard to precepting. So welcome, Cherish.
Thank you for having me.
You are quite welcome. So tell me first, to start out with, do you have a definition of precepting or?
Sure. To me, a preceptor is someone who is getting the preceptee or a coworker, other staff member ready and fit for the job. So that could come with a variety of different details, but that's my basic definition.
Yeah, that's a great definition. Where was I the other day? I think it was in Hobby Lobby the other day, and I saw a definition. I'm going to try to see if I can find it here really quick, of a coach. And I thought, oh, that's a great definition of what could be a definition of a preceptor, a passionate, dedicated individual who unlocks hidden potentials and maximizes a team performance by believing, encouraging, and developing. And I thought, I love that. That sounds like a preceptor, as I was kind of preparing and trying to decide which way to go with some of these things. And I thought, I think that's a great definition that we could use as a preceptor, right?
I agree.
We all have different strengths that we can bring to the ultrasound field. And so, yeah, I think helping them to develop their strength in that area is one of the keys to it as well.
Absolutely.
So tell us how long you've been doing this and where you've been doing this.
Ultrasound specifically, or just precepting?
Precepting, I'm sorry.
Precepting. Okay. So I started working for Austin MFM in 2012. And I think it was maybe a year and a half to 2 years into that I started precepting with them. And I stayed on as preceptor, became lead, but also stayed precepting with them through 2021. I think I just hit 3 years of not working there anymore.
Awesome. So, what are some of the goals, do you think, that a preceptor should have for their students?
I think first and foremost, as a preceptor, your job is to have this person, not only being able to scan protocols, but also willing and able to look ahead and anticipate the needs of the physician, anticipate the needs of the patient, anticipate the needs of teammates. And I think that goes hand in hand with being good at your job. And so as a preceptor, I think that's something that's important to try to develop along with scanning and, familiarity with protocols and machine and workflow, et cetera. But also community and culture and getting, helping this employee to integrate into the culture of your workplace and find their niche within your team.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a lot to put on somebody, right?
It is.
Um,
And not everybody's a perfect match for everybody. And that's okay. That's okay.
What do you mean by that? A
Uh,
perfect match for the department or a perfect match as far for you?
Preceptee and preceptor, not I think the vast majority of sonographers are visual learners and or hands-on, learners, but not everyone is. And so if that is your style of learning, it might be a little bit more difficult to teach someone who that's not their style. Um, and people might be more outgoing than others. Some people might be, more quiet. And so there might be another preceptor on your team that just jives better. And so, I don't think there's any shame in either being the preceptor or the preceptee in talking and saying, hey, maybe we should try something else. This isn't working out.
And so how do you identify that?
As a preceptor, I I'm probably a bad example because I'm willing to give people a billion chances and just stand by someone's side through thick and thin. So I would put it more on the preceptee to say, look, I don't feel like I'm accelerating in this arrangement and probably talk to management at a weekly, what they should hopefully have weekly or bi-weekly check-ins. And really kind of just let everyone know what you're thinking. Don't stick in something if it's not working out.
Yeah,
And
so
hopefully there's more preceptors on your team.
I'm gonna say, so are you assuming that everyone in your department is somewhat of a preceptor?
No, definitely not. Uh, my de my department, my last job was a big department spread across a variety of locations. So if you're at one of those smaller locations training, you probably don't have, much of a choice in your preceptor unless you were willing to commute to another location.
Yeah.
But where I worked, we had 12 sonographers, and probably on any given day, three of those were preceptor and or lead and capable of precepting with an educator on staff as well.
Oh, awesome. So you were highly supported.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
And I
that's,
think learning MFM in that atmosphere, I don't think you could beat a learning atmosphere for MFM.
you don't think, I'm sorry, say that again?
I don't think you could beat that in terms of
Oh,
a good learning atmosphere.
yeah. Yeah. So I've been in other situations where they're smaller and you don't have that many options, right? And
Yep.
if there's one person who's the real lead to the whole thing, and so that's your only option, right?
Yes. Yes.
So, let's talk a little bit about, we've talked about what we feel the role of the preceptor is. Let's talk a little bit about the role of the student, I guess. What do you feel are their responsibilities in the process?
I feel like their primary responsibility is to just come in open-minded and, you know, you don't know what you don't know. So, I think even if I was more experienced than my preceptor at a new job, I would be willing to hear them out about anything they had to say.
Sure. Let's talk about a different difficult situation. I remember kind of trying to mentor someone and they could definitely do the job. And we talked about that one area was speed, like getting the exam done in a certain amount of time.
Mhm.
Um, but they were really struggling with that. And even though we
Yeah,
talked about it several different times in different ways, still kind of choosing not to be really efficient in regard
sure.
to that.
Mhm.
What kind of ideas would you have for someone like that who might have struggles in that area?
I think at least from what I see in a lot of people is that the biggest time sink is trying to get the perfect image. And I think that's not always reasonably achievable. So I think learning to kind of levy those expectations and, hey, I can't get this picture, I'm going to come back to it later. Or
This is
I
the
came
best.
back to it later and this is the best it's going to get. And unfortunately, this view and a couple others are just suboptimal today, unfortunately. But I think learning when to when to throw in the towel and I think that really comes from confidence and learning, hey, this is as good as it's gonna get
So,
today.
right. So how much time, when we're talking about length of time, like sometimes we are preceptor for students, right? So
Mhm.
students have an X amount of time in our
Sure.
department and then they move on, right? And
Mhm.
so there's certain things that they have to check off to complete their rotation. What about if we're precepting someone, like orientating them to the department and precepting them? Is there a recommended time frame that you have to get someone on board?
I think knowing right up front the experience level of someone is very important. And as a new employee, you need to be very honest about that because you would only be setting yourself up for failure if you're not. Um, But for example, in MFM, a lot of people come in not having their echo, for example. Not, of course, not everyone, but a lot of people.
Mhm.
Uh, and so we would line up with them and say, hey, look, we've got a 3-month training program. And I think that's another thing if you're a new employee or a prospective employee that you need to find out if they have a length of time, if they have a learning program mapped out for you, if they have weekly check-ins set up for you, if they have a way for you to safely and comfortably uh, relay your experience with, the training process and things. I think all of those things need to be set up for you. But that being said, um, 3 months, if Echo is really all they needed to learn with us. Otherwise, if it was like a new grad, we would give them 6 months of solid preceptor training.
Awesome. Awesome. Wow. That's great. I know, that varies so much, right? Depending on where you're at. And so some places are given 3 months, and
Working general ultrasound, I feel like I never got more than a week.
yeah, right. Right. Yeah, and there's so much more to maternal fetal medicine, right? Than what people I think give credit to. And Heden's too. And I think you spoke to it a little bit earlier when it's not just about the scanning, it's about being a good team player and looking ahead and knowing what your doctors like and what your doctors don't like and different things like that as well. So, would you like to add anything to that or
I
being able
think
to
that
culture?
is another part of being an efficient worker. If you know in advance, hey, I found this, so the doc's gonna want this, whether it's, some Dopplers or a BPP or the patient to go to NST, et cetera, et cetera. Those are huge time-saving steps. If you can go ahead and just, get ahead of that and get that done beforehand, then you don't have to go to the doc, wait for the doc to review it, then go back to the patient, say, hey, we need to get you up on the table, or undressed again, all of these things that just really add up in time. So I think as a learner, if you can see your preceptor doing these things and kind of pick up on that, even if they're not saying it to you, which they should be hopefully, but just watching and learning and just trying to get a step ahead.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's awesome to lead by example, right? So you're wanting them to just kind of pay attention to what you're doing,
And
and
and I don't expect everyone to be a clone or a copycat. Of course, that's
sure,
not
sure.
how humans work, but I think there's just some probably good habits that should be adopted.
Right. So do you recommend students staying with one particular person the whole time, or do they have several different preceptors?
I think we usually would do like a month one-on-one as long as everything was working out and we were both great with each other. We would do a month and then swap. And you might get time with, three different people, or you might do one, then the other, and then back to the first one again, depending on, what everyone thinks and how things are going.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really important. I know students have kind of been sometimes bounced around from person to person. And when you're first learning, I think that's super hard because so
Need
many
some
people
stability.
do things so differently, right? And it
Mhm.
doesn't mean that anybody's right or wrong. It's just different, right?
Yep.
But when you're first learning, I always think it's just really helpful to kind of stick with the same person for a period of time, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Knowing I tell people there's a reason why I do everything, right? I
Yes.
ask this way and not that way, right? When
Yes.
was your period? No, when was the first day of your, like, being very specific in what you're requesting, and different things like that. But I think as a student who has to kind of hop around from person to person, it does kind of make it challenging.
It
So
can be.
have one person, or like you said, two or three, to really take on those roles. What about timing? Because, I find myself inhaling, I drink a lot of water regardless, but when I'm teaching or showing someone, I am like talking a lot, right? And so it takes up more time,
It
right?
does. It does.
So
And letting them scan takes more time too, of course.
right, right. So do you allow for extra time in the schedule for you in regard to that as well?
So the way that particular location worked is we didn't have, a schedule for a set room. We had a schedule for the office, for example. And so it was just first come, first serve. And so if you were taking a little bit longer going over reporting, with your preceptee, then someone else is just going to naturally pick up that slack, and that's expected.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I've seen it work both ways, right? Some people have set rooms and
Mhm.
some people have the
I think that makes it a lot harder when you're training for sure. Trying
right.
to stick
Right.
within those
Unless
rigid
you
time
add more
frames.
time, right? Unless you
Mhm.
add more time to that.
Yep. Yep. You would have to. I think you would have to.
So tell me what you've learned in regard to the different types of learners.
Like I said before, I think the vast majority of sonographers are either visual and or hands-on learners. And that just kind of comes with having good hand-eye coordination and being able to read ultrasound images in general. Um, and so I think knowing who your hands-on learners are, those people need to be scanning as much as possible and probably can benefit more from you helping them, show them how small, like putting your hand on the probe with them and making those small tweaks and just showing them like you're in the right spot, I swear. You just like it's the smallest little tweak and this is what it feels like. And
Right.
so I think that's really helpful for them.
Right. I agree. Yeah. I think doing that occasionally is
The
is
whole
really
exam would be crazy, but
right. 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 But allowing them some time to kind of figure it out on their own, right?
Right,
That's
yes.
a huge important thing. When I learned, they just stuck me in a room and said, "Here you go." And it took me an hour, but I got it and I got faster as I did it. But the nice part is that they had given me the time to figure it out. So, yeah. And I think sometimes we lack that in our areas nowadays, right? To
Absolutely.
give them the time they need to,
Everyone's just go, go, go.
right, right. Let's talk about feedback a little bit and how
Mhm.
you give that, like,
Sure,
and the different kind of reactions you may get.
sure.
So I know I'm a pretty direct person,
I am
right?
too. I want honesty. Please. I don't care how blunt it is, just tell me.
Right, right. But some of our students are not
They are
that
definitely not.
they don't like the directness
They do
often.
not.
So
Compliment sandwiches.
okay.
That's the best way I have found to do it. Tell them what they're doing great. Slide in what they need to work on right this second, and then follow it up with something else that they're doing well.
Okay. I call it the Oreo sandwich. Yeah. Yeah. The Oreo. And I found that worked with my kids. Someday for parenting. I learned that from parenting and took it to work with me. But Yeah, I found that too. Yeah, to do the Oreo, like, this is what I really appreciated, seeing you communicate with the patient or
Mhm.
vice versa, right?
Yep. And if they're hurt by the feedback, I just reassure them that, you're feeling this emotional response because you care, and that's a good thing. I'm so happy you care, and all I want to do is help you be better. And that's really been my approach to people who feel hurt by it.
Yeah. And sometimes when I have to give more challenging feedback, maybe I've given the feedback before and it doesn't feel like they're getting it. Sometimes I have to say, would you mind? I have to ask permission. Would you mind if I share some maybe feedback for you and just get their permission one way or the other, because getting permission and it kind of sets you up. Like I kind of have
I
to share
think they
art,
know that you're serious then.
you know, um, is this a good time to share that? Something of that nature also helps that communication
Mm,
level for me to,
definitely.
yeah. So because that's really what learning is, right? Is constantly getting that feedback to better yourself, right?
Totally. And at my prior job, we had set up weekly check-ins for people who were being precepted. And so we would go one-on-one and sit, somewhere we could shut the door and have a conversation where we were both very open and honest. And, it's two sides. I'm giving you this feedback as the preceptee, but there's also an opportunity for you to say what you think, what you feel, what you're experiencing, what you need.
Right. Yeah, but I appreciate those times too. Like let's recap the week, right? I
Mhm.
do that for myself. Like let me recap my week. How did I do? How did I show up? How was I feeling? Like
What
where
made me feel uncomfortable, and how can I prevent that in the future?
yeah. What can I do different to show up better, right?
Yes.
Different things like that. So I think that's always really important. And just I usually open it up by saying, tell me how do you feel like it's going,
Yes. Yes.
and let them go from there. As a traveler presently now, I've got plenty of feedback, right? And
More than you need.
well, I'm always open to feedback, right? I always want to get better. I'm here to help you, right? But it's so interesting, right? To get it in different ways, right? Um, so sometimes I've had people come and they have a whole list. Well, you forgot this, and she listed about 9 things. And then she goes, so how are you feeling? I'm
I
like,
feel like I didn't hear you pass item 3.
a bit overwhelmed, and they're kind of like with this expectation of, oh, she might not fit in, right? Or oh, she might not measure up or whatever. And I'm like, I'm on day 4, and you just gave me a list of 9 things. So if you're training or precepting travelers,
Mhm.
is there a different way that you do that versus
Absolutely. Absolutely. Someone your facility is bringing in as a traveler, they've done the background and like they know about this person, right? They know if they have echo experience, for example. They know if they have uh, experience doing procedures. So my feeling as a preceptor for those folks is I'm not so much there to critique their scanning. I'm there to make sure they're ticking the boxes in the protocol. I'm there to make sure that they're treating the patients well. I'm there to assist them for differences maybe in physicians and preferences with physicians. I'm there to help them culturally assimilate as much as possible as they can in 3 months' time. Uh, as far as their knowledge and their scanning background, as far as I'm concerned, unless there's big concerns once I see them scan, that's not so much what I'm there to do for a traveler.
yeah, yes, wow. I wish all of I wish all my sites were like that, right?
We definitely have had some travelers who it's like, that's not the aortic arch. Let's maybe work on that one thing. But,
Right.
by and large, travelers are there and traveling because they know what they're doing.
Right. But in my experience, and a lot of travelers have only had OB experience. They haven't always had high risk OB experience. So some people that I've talked to are like, how do we figure out like if they've really had high risk? Like, and so we've kind of talked through some of their requirements and some
Mhm.
questions that are good to ask, you know. As a traveler, there are plenty of sites that I've gone to. Like I just came off a stretch before this present job that I'm at where I was at so a lot of places have like, we need high risk, we need video echo, we want, NT, nasal bone, clear, all these certifications. And I get there and I'm doing biophysicals, first trimesters, growths, you know, and no high risk.
Yeah, they put you on like yeah,
They're doing all the high risk because their doctors trust them with the high risk. So
that's fine.
it's a trust, right? But it does kind of make your mind go to mush, right? If
Yeah.
you're doing that for 6 to 9 months, and then now all of a sudden I'm in a high risk OB where I'm doing the high
Mhm.
risk, and I'm like, oh, give me a minute, hang on, I got here, right?
Yep.
But they don't know that that has been my past, right? So I think it's really when important to kind of ask
Check in.
well, check in, but seek to understand, maybe, right? Instead of making assumptions. I've had so
Right.
many people make assumptions about me, and I'm like, look, I can do it. I've been to fetal surgeries. I've done fetal echoes at 16 weeks, but have I've done a fetal echo at 16 weeks, maybe 3 years ago, right? Like
Yep.
I've never done a fetal echo like I used to do a fetal echo in a high risk perinatal lab since I've traveled, right?
Mhm.
So I think it's important to know or be familiar with expectations of your travelers. Like, we all come in like super anxious and nervous, right? We want to fulfill your expectations, right?
Mhm.
And some people have expectations like way up here, like, why didn't you know that? Well, why didn't you do that? And as a traveler, you kind of feel damned if you do and damned if you don't, right?
I've seen both sides of that. I've seen the travelers are like, you don't do it that way. I'm like, no.
Yeah, right. Well, the other day there was a different kind of table, and I'm like, oh, I could play around with this, or I could go ask somebody, and somebody was
Mm.
available. So I asked, and they're like, well, just play around with it. And I'm like, yeah, I've played around with it before and got it jammed or stuck. And then
There's
people,
a patient and they're like, I don't want her to make assumptions if I don't know how to use the table, you know?
right. And I like, I don't want to get it jammed or stuck, and then everybody mad because I got it jammed or stuck. So, the person I asked was like, just play around with it. Like, what's wrong? Why can't you just play around with it? And I'm like, I'm used to playing around with it, but sometimes, and it was an unspoken thing. I mean, it was portrayed by body language and tone, right?
Mm. Yeah.
And not by question or trying to understand.
Mm.
So, another situation is just don't assume.
Yeah.
A lot of people clean their trophons differently and they keep track of it differently. So
Very
at one
differently.
location, they had two books, and I didn't know that. They always kept referring to the book. So I thought there was one book,
I would think that too.
And so she's like, what's wrong with you? Don't you know? Shouldn't you know? You've been scanning for 28 years. And I'm like, oh, like you
First
signed
of
the
all,
sheet.
trophons haven't been around that long.
Right, exactly, right. And you signed the sheet that you understood. And I'm like, well, she passed by the room and said, there's a trophon. Do you know how to use it? Yes, I do. I've programmed trophons. I've trained people in trophons and the cleaning, the sterilization. I know very well about the trophon, but no one said, hey, there's two books, right?
Right.
And so,
I wouldn't have expected two books.
yeah, so there was a disconnect there and an expectation that, like, travelers, you should know. and I'm like, we do know
Didn't know you
a
did things
lot,
inefficiently.
but
Sorry.
we also learn not to assume sometimes as well, right? And
Yeah.
in your little checkoff sheet that I signed, it said the trophon and the recording of it. It didn't say to.
It didn't have the exact spelled out process. Yeah.
So sometimes having that exact process, what do you want me to know about the trophon, right?
Mhm.
Do you want me to know how to purge it? Do you want me to know how to program it? Some people, everybody has a separate card,
Yeah.
some people don't. So I think it's important to be as specific as possible when you're training travelers, just because, and I get this a lot, you've been here for 10, 15 years, whatever, but you don't realize there's like 8 different ways to do this, right?
You did
And
not invent the wheel.
right,
Someone
right.
someone else
Some of them are like,
invented
what do you mean? This
a
is the only
fancier
way to
wheel.
do this. And I'm
Yeah.
like, not really, but you're not asking, so I'm not going to tell, So, when we are training, I think it's important to be as specific as we can be. And like you said, kind of give the reason why we do what we're doing, right?
100%.
Yeah. So, what should prospective interviewees ask about training?
I think I touched on this just a little bit, but I think it's really important, like I said, for them to come in open and honest with their skill set so that the new employer can really kind of have in mind and help devise for them what this training process might look like. Um, when we were bringing in staff, we'd have them sit down with their educators so we could make sure that our expectations were all in line, day one. And so then I think it's important that you ask, okay, how long? Now, I've told you my skills and my experience. How long do you think that's going to take? How often are we going to be checking in about progress so I can get feedback as well as provide feedback to you? And what happens if I don't meet those expectations?
Very good question, right?
Mm. I think like knowing up front that they're just going to say, okay, we'll give you 6 months, then you don't need to be that anxious about a 3 month time period,
Right. 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 And helping to manage people's anxiety, right?
Exactly. And then I think saying, oh, okay, well, you were going to be training for 3 months like that. I'm not an anxious person, but if I was learning something new, that would make me very anxious.
Right. Right. Yes. Yeah, I too have trouble with anxiety. And so I have to be careful what kind of stories I tell myself in my head, right? When I'm going into a new location and I'm trying to learn something new, like they're not here to sabotage me, right? Like I am constantly doing a lot of self-talk as someone learning to
Mhm.
remind myself we're all in this together. We're all trying to learn this, to
Yes.
be together and do these things. So I think it's important as someone coming in to learn that you give yourself grace, right?
And know that your preceptor, even if you don't see eye to eye on everything, and if you don't agree with everything they're saying to you, wants the same thing you do. They want you to excel at your job.
Right. Right. So remind yourself of that, but also remind yourself, like sometimes in some jobs that or times when I get so overwhelmed, at the end of the day, I write out, this is what I'm grateful for. This is what I've done well. This is what I could work on, so that I can put the day behind me and I can be
Mhm.
ready for the next, right?
Yes.
So, I don't know if that's helpful to anyone, but just kind of doing a little check-in with yourself and preparation and giving myself credit for what I've done.
That's huge.
Really, I saw myself propel forward a lot when I was able to say, okay, I am doing things right,
Yeah. I
and
call it noting. I note
oh,
anytime that I feel like I've done something well or someone has said something. It doesn't always have to be direct feedback from someone because I feel like as you get better at your job, you get less of that.
right, right,
So
right.
anytime that I feel like I've done something well, I note that. Like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm grateful. And it might only be once or twice a day, but it's a check-in point with yourself to say, hey, you're doing a good job.
Or that what I do matters,
Mhm.
right? I think what we do matters. Even after X amount of years that we've been in, I think we forget sometimes that what we do really matters, and how we do it
It's
matters.
easy to get lost in the grind for sure.
Yeah. And so, has there ever been a time when you have given feedback in a not so great way? And if you
Yeah.
have,
Yep.
how have you recovered? So let's talk about
I just hit on like my biggest regret of my career.
we all have them. We all have them.
Oh, I gave feedback in a very, very bad way one time, and it's because I didn't give it to the person. I didn't give it directly to them when I should have. I gave it to their yearly evaluation. And if I could take that back, I would, because I saw what it did to that person. They were, in fairness, quitting anyway, and everyone knew that. However, that was no excuse to having just not giving them feedback to their face when they deserve that. Everyone deserves that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, oh, that's so good. What a jewel. Thanks for sharing that. Because
Sorry, Jana.
what?
Sorry, Jana. I don't think she's scanning it anymore, but just she happens to see this.
No, I think it shouldn't be a surprise, right? At the end.
No, it should never be. It should never be.
Yeah. And so if you haven't heard it from your trainer,
Or in this case, I was her lead. Like I owed that to her. She was a preceptor, actually.
okay. So yeah, I think if you haven't heard it from me, like as a preceptor, I was reporting to my manager, how is, because my manager would call and check, how are they doing? How do you feel? What do you think? And I would share my opinion, right? And I don't want to share that with my manager if I haven't shared that with them, right?
And you shouldn't.
Given them an opportunity to work on it or know about it, right?
Yep. They should never be blindsided by something negative.
Correct. Yeah. But I think we also kind of maybe need to talk about trust a little bit too, right? So, interesting. In my present position, I mean, we all make mistakes, right?
Of course.
So we're all learning, okay, how do I fix this, right? And we've all missed stuff. So I'm not saying anything that no one doesn't already know. You've been scanning this long, that you've messed up, right?
Yep.
So as a traveler, things were kind of hectic, and I brought back a patient, and we had two patients with the same name. And the patient that I brought back was extremely nervous. She had two little kids, and we had to find someone to help take care of them. And she was just rattling on and on and on. And she was, talking about this, that, and the other. And so instead of asking her date of birth, I said, is your date of birth, blah, blah, blah. And she's, yeah, yeah. And we moved on. Right. And it was the total wrong patient. Right. And I was just like, oh, you've got to, you hear the knock at the door. Right. And you're like, Debbie, can we talk to you? And you're just humiliated, right? You're just like, oh my gosh, how did I do this? Like, I know better. You're just already beating yourself up, And then the supervisor finds out about it and just berates me in the middle of the hall in front of people. You should know better, and we don't ask like that, and how could you do that? Now it's going to take forever, and da 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 da. And I'm like, okay, how do I fix this? Like, I'm trying to get past this, right? And so, okay, I find out what I need to do to fix it, and then later I'm walking down the hall to sign off to the physician, and I walk into the physician's office with her talking bad about me to the physician, right? And so, I just think
Not a good look.
not, right? That really makes relationships hard,
Yeah, you might be able to recover the situation, but I don't think you recover the relationship.
Right, right. So, unfortunately, I'm still working there. I don't mind where I'm working, and I think it's important to understand and give grace to people. Like, hurting people hurt people, right? She's going through a pretty difficult time personally. So, and luckily I was able to go home and kind of journal about it and get rid of the shame and the guilt and like, okay, I fixed it. I fixed it in like 10 minutes. It wasn't like
Yeah.
2 days like she said it was going to be.
And I'm
And
never going to do that again.
right, exactly, right? Knowing that there's a chance I could, but I'm really going to work on, but at the moment I was really trying to like help the patient kind of relax and like breathe and it's going to be okay and like
Yeah.
let's get started, right? And the supervisor didn't really seek to understand, right? And
No.
there was just no excuse, no excuse. And then to see her talk behind my back was just really hurtful. It's like everybody makes mistakes and it wasn't intentional and I'm happy to fix it, and it did get resolved and it did get fixed. But I think we got to make sure that we're showing up our best selves, even when we're in hard places, right?
Yeah.
We're all expected to do that. And if you're in such a hard place that you don't have the emotional capacity to be your best, then maybe you need to ask someone to help you or ask someone to take that on for a couple weeks until you get through the worst part of it, right?
Yeah.
Of whatever you're going through. But yeah, that's hard to recover from, and I think as a traveler, we really run into that a lot, right? They're
Yeah.
under stress, they're low on staff, they get pressure from the doctors to hurry up and get these people in,
Yeah.
right? They're not in a good place. And so as a traveler, you're not walking into always a stable environment,
True.
right? But you
Yep.
learn really quick why they're low on staff.
Yep. Yep. Why is this place a dumpster fire? There's a reason.
Right, right. So yeah, I just think as human beings, right, supporting, and there's so much of ourselves in high risk OB that we give out, right? We give out to the person we're training, we're giving out to our patients, we're giving out to our coworkers, we're giving out to our physicians. We're like trying to put out fires everywhere we go. We're trying to dot our I's and cross our T's, right?
Yep.
There is so much in high
And you're
risk.
physically tired on top of the emotional drain.
Correct, right? Like many times after work, I'm not physically tired. I'm emotionally tired, right?
Right. Right.
Um,
But after that fourth anatomy, you might be both.
right, right, exactly, right. And maybe I had one day I went to the doctor and I'm like, okay, this is my third BMI of 50 and more. So 50 seems pretty skinny compared to the others,
Bring it
Um,
on.
but that really wears you out, right?
Yep.
So learning to take a breath, learning to show up for your best self, learning how to deal with difficult situations like that, how to give grace to others, right? How to give
Yeah.
grace to yourself.
Mhm.
And know that no one's intention, I think, is to be mean or ugly or whatever, right? But
Typically,
every
no.
now and then we need a little reminder. Hey, that sounded kind of harsh.
Yep.
Is there something I can do or something going on
Yep.
that I can help you with? Like for each other, So, yeah, I think being a preceptor of anyone, a student, of a traveler, of a new hire, it's hard.
It's
It's a
hard.
lot of extra energy. And so when you know you're doing that, I think you just have to kind of set yourself up in private to make sure you're filling your own bucket.
I agree.
You agree?
And make sure you're able to give that trainee the best that you have.
Right.
Even if it's the best you have that day, just
Right.
making sure you're able to provide that.
Yeah. And sometimes I think just being self-aware and coming into the training. And so sometimes you can say to your trainee, I'm kind of struggling today, I might be a little off. Please don't take anything personal, this, that, or the other, right? Like communicating what's going on for you, I think is also helpful,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
Sometimes,
And therapeutic sometimes.
Yeah, somebody might have just dumped a whole bunch of stuff on you, and then you've got to go and give, right? And
Mhm.
so it's tough, and to go from room to room to room, like we forget, that sometimes I'm in a room where they've had 5 miscarriages and they finally have a successful pregnancy and we're so elated and excited. And the next room, I'm like, darn, your baby doesn't have kidneys and you're not going to have a baby
Yep.
that survive, right? Like we go from the highest to the highest to the lowest of the lows, right? And
Yep.
so that takes a lot of energy from us.
And setting a good example in those situations for the preceptee to see, look, this is how they handle it.
Yeah. Yeah. And managing the patient's emotions too, right? So you're trying to like manage everybody's expectations, right? And it's stressful. So to take good self-care and check in with yourself, I do breath work, I take a big deep breath, I say a little prayer, because I do think our rooms are like holy ground. I don't know if I've said this but when we invite our patient in, we could give them information to change their whole life, right? Either you're going to have a great experience or you're going to be told some information that's going to be so gut wrenching hard to hear,
Mhm.
and you're going to have to make some hard decisions.
Yeah.
And it could mean that they're in the doctor's office with this child for the rest of their life,
Yep.
or it's a quick fix, a little rough to the first start of life, but then breeze on through the rest of life. We don't know, but to hold the space for people to learn, to grow, to self-reflect, I think is important parts of being a good preceptor.
Mhm.
Anything else you'd like to add that maybe we
No,
haven't covered?
I don't think so. No.
Good. Well, thank you so much for sharing your experience and your strength. And I love how um, it's it sounds like you've really set up a good example for being prepared for that kind of
I hope so.
yeah situation, because I think a lot of it is really some of the places are so small that it really the bulk of it really lands on one person, right?
Yep.
Usually
Mhm.
like the lead sonographer. So they're the lead sonographer and the trainer and
Yep.
everything.
Yep.
And I'm sad. I understand why that is, but sometimes I'm sad because that's a lot of weight for one person to hold on to.
Yes.
If that one person decides to leave or something happens in their family and they need to leave, then that whole
Mhm.
department is kind of got a big hole.
Yep.
Yeah,
That's how I became a preceptor, actually.
really
Yep.
is how.
Was I ready for it or not? We lost our one person, and so they needed anyone to step up and look at me like, well, you've been here a year and a half. Like, obviously you should do it. Like, but I just learned echo from you guys. Like, I didn't know how to do it before I got here. What do you mean?
Yeah, so do one, teach one, see one, right?
Yeah, yeah. I,
Your
I
good phrase
I
of
tell trainees that now, and they're like, no.
well,
Good.
I tell people that's a great motto to have. We've had it for ages. It was around when I was learning, and I used to think, you got to be kidding me, right? But the reality is,
Do
it's a
one, try
great,
one at least,
yeah, it's
or
a
see one,
great
try one.
model, right? Because if you can see a biophysical, then do a biophysical, then tell me how you would teach somebody else to do one.
Yeah.
You've got
Hmm.
it, right?
Yeah. Even
Another,
if it's something more advanced than that, if you've seen one, I think trying one is the obvious next step. Whether
right,
you succeed
right,
or not is not important in that moment. It's
right,
it's doing it,
right, right. And you might have to do 1,000 of them before you really feel great
and
at
you
it.
will.
Sometimes I come across a fetal heart and I'm like, holy cow, what the heck? Where do I start and what do I tell people?
Hmm.
And um, where do we go from here? So, um, I think that's a great motto too to bring forward and to bring forth. Another teacher of mine would give us clay, and we would have to build with clay what we were looking at and
Mm.
where the vessels went and all that kind of different things, so that we really understood the anatomy of what we were going through. So
I think the whiteboard for my fetal echo test was just me drawing a heart like 16 times
yeah,
to try to visualize.
that's important. That's helpful, right? So whatever it takes. Sometimes you draw it out. Sometimes you hold it in your hand and you see the model and you twist and turn and understand where everything is and goes. Sometimes, there's this person being trained right now, and she just grasped a lot of things by reading. And I'm like, oh my God, I'd have to
Good for you.
gotta write it down. I've got to, physically put some physical action to it, for me to remember it. But learning all those different key ways of learning, I think for a lot of different people is helpful, and to see it done by a lot of different people sometimes.
Yeah.
In ways after you've learned your basic and got standard.
As a student, I love that. Like, okay, I spent a month with someone my first month there, but then getting to spend a little bit of time with everyone and seeing how differently they did it and then combining all of those things into one perfect thing for me. I really appreciated that opportunity.
Yeah. That's important, because now when you're on your own, you don't always get an opportunity to see how somebody else does something,
Nope.
and so it's good. It's good to be able to see, and that's why going to your local organization, if you have one, and socializing with other colleagues and asking questions and chatting about what they're doing, or going to SDMS or other AIUM seminars and different things such as that. Those are all super important, because then you get to talking to other people about, oh, wow. So, okay, so how do you do that? Oh, and we help each other, right? And we share information. And I think there's going to be a lot more of that as we move forward in our.
Yep, and seeing what people are doing on, in Facebook groups, on Instagram, in Discord, in different groups. I think, like, if I could have had that when I was a student, I can't even imagine, how like stimulated my brain would have been and how, plugged into the community I would have been from the roots up.
Right.
So I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. And, I love SDMS this year. I hadn't been in quite a while, and it's like, wow, there's all these resources that I could share with different people now, that I didn't have before, right?
Yep.
So I think that's just always really helpful, right?
Yeah.
So, especially when we're losing our mentorship so much one-on-one with physicians, right? When we're going to more of a mentor from each other.
Yep.
Period.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you again. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your time, and I know that's precious. More than anything, time is a gift. And so thank you so much for your gift to our profession. And if anyone is wanting to get a hold of her or ask some questions, please see the show notes. And I'm sure she'll be happy to get back to you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for tuning in to It's All About the Frequency podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Share it with a friend, and remember to keep your frequency high.